First, we're going to have Dr. Anna Song talking about the importance of crafting messages to debate flavors and menthol. She's going to be followed by Dr. Denise Payan from UC Irvine, who will be talking about the need to set the record straight on flavors. Followed by a presentation by Dr. Sabrina Smiley from San Diego State University. And she'll be talking to us today about flavors through the lens of health equity, an incredibly important topic, particularly for our region. I'm very excited about this presentation. And then Dr. Song and I will talk about some of the resources that the NCPC has available for your work, and talk about some approaches that we found to be useful in terms of writing in impactful ways and utilizing the stories from our communities to really get our messages across. And then the most exciting part of the webinar will happen, which is we will be breaking out into working sessions together to work on crafting messages that will communicate how flavors are impacting our communities. So we're really, really excited about this, and so happy to have you all here today. So I am going to now hand things over to the director of UC Merced's Nicotine and Cannabis Policy Center, Dr. Anna Song, who's a professor of psychology at UC Merced. So welcome, Anna.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And it's wonderful to virtually see all of you. And again, this is our, we've had numerous webinars since the pandemic. And so again, I just want to reiterate my wish that everyone is being safe, and that we will be able to share personal space, break bread, commune with one another very soon. I'm very confident of that, and I'm going to look forward to that day. I did want to thank our partners in this endeavor at the American Heart Association and the Health Sciences Research Institute, at UC Merced, and all of the wonderful speakers here, because what we're doing today is something really new and something so important, as Dr. Burke had mentioned. And the reason why, and the genesis behind all of this, is that we have a lot of issues headed our way, particularly in the front for flavors. It is the next major policy point that we are facing as a community. And as we know, with the issues with flavors, or with any policy, much of the comments, much of the of where we're getting input tends to be from metropolitan cities or large institutes with a lot of resources. And many times those voices of those who are directly impacted by these policies are muted. And so our major goal, the mission of what we're here to do today, is to make sure that our voices are heard loud and clear, especially when it comes to flavors. We want to make sure that we are mobilized as one voice to talk about how flavors impact us personally, impact us as a community, what we see as leaders of community, and how these flavors and these policies impact our lives, all for the goal for health equity, right? So that and the question really is, how do we have health equity if we don't hear the voices of our community members? So what we're gearing up today is to make sure and amplify our voices together. When these policies come down the pipeline, we're going to be asked to provide public comment, and that is an incredibly important step for us as a community. What we're hoping today is that we're going to build some capacity and practice getting those voices heard loud and clear, and projecting that in cogent, clear, convincing ways. And so we're really excited. It's going to be, it's a new thing that we're doing. We're excited to be sharing some time with you. I'm going to be in some of these rooms and exercises with you all. So I'm really excited to see some of you, in this exercise. So on that note, I'm going to give it back to Nancy to get going on today's agenda.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anna. So just a note that I forgot to mention, we were so excited about this webinar, we were excited to be able to provide the participants with all of you as participants with a gift card so that you could enjoy lunch while participating. And we thought we would have about 100 people. We exceeded our expectations. We have over 130. So some of you may not have received a gift card, and I want to let you know you will be receiving one because we had 100 and we just exceeded our expectations. So I want to let you know that you will be receiving one. And then I just want to take a minute to just let you know that these breakout sessions that Anna and I have mentioned will be facilitated by members of our team. So we're really excited to work with you and do some hands-on work toward the end of the webinar. Right now, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Denise Payan, who is a professor at the University of California, Irvine, and an affiliated faculty with UC Merced, and particularly with our Nicotine and Cannabis Policy Center. At UC Merced, she's in the Department of Health, Society, and Behavior and the Public Health Program. And Dr. Payan will be talking with us about policy advocacy to reduce the availability of flavored tobacco and e-cigarette products. So welcome, Dr. Payan.
Thank you so much, Nancy. So I am starting this new position this month. I see a lot of familiar names. So this position at UC Irvine, but I'll continue to be an affiliate of NCPC, and some of my work continues to be focused on this region. So today I'll be talking about policy advocacy to reduce availability of flavored tobacco and e-cigarette products. Next slide. And just thank you so much to the Nicotine and Cannabis Policy Center and to the American Heart Association for this opportunity, but also for the wealth of resources, some of which I will reference, that are already available to you all. I know many of you have participated in the in-person workshops before the pandemic, and these really great webinars during the pandemic. So I'll start off with this policy slide. I am a health policy researcher. I also teach health policy classes, and why public policy, right, as a strategy. And many of you are policy advocates that are on the ground, really in the trenches in local and state policy in California. But I really like to just think about why we would like to use public policy. There's so many different resources or strategies that we can engage. Some of you are health educators, right? And that's a really critical component as well. But public policy is just so powerful. You can change the environment, incentives, human behavior in such a short period of time. So this slide just shows you this example of success from over this 20-year period, more or less, in New York City, where it shows you the smoking prevalence rate in New York City, and it kind of connects these specific policy strategies that were undertaken at the local, state, and federal level, and the impact on health behavior, right? And so the benefits being population level benefits for the entire community, for families, for individuals in the workspace, but also for the individuals, right? To engage in cessation and to also prevent smoking. And so policy, there's so many different strategies here. I like this slide because it shows you, right, there's taxes, which are very effective at reducing, increases the price, at reducing the use initiation, but also continued smoking. You have these free patch programs that focus more on cessation, making resources available to people, media campaigns, importance of the communication environment, especially for young people. And so what I like about this slide is you see the potential for policy in a short period of time at kind of being effective at its goal. There's a lot of other things that are not apparent here, right? The equity, they're inequitable policies. Different populations are impacted differently. And in the next, today there also will be Dr. Smiley will be focused on health equity, which is such an important and often overlooked aspect in policy. So next slide. So that's our motivation. And today I'll really focus on flavor. So there really is this window of opportunity right now at various levels of government. Flavored product policies to regulate, especially flavor bans, are really, they're on the agenda. And so there's this window of opportunity to engage, to promote, and to get to pass these policies. Often that's the difficulty, getting a topic on the agenda to start off with. But recognizing that COVID-19 is still at the forefront and will continue to be kind of front and center with good reason of all policy agendas. In the health policy space, flavor bans are already there. And so there's this opportunity to engage, to think about what types of policies, comprehensive policies versus those with exemptions, and what we would like to do, right, to create healthier spaces. So here, this slide just highlights different, briefly, opportunities at the federal level. Last year, the FDA proposed banning menthol, which is the last allowable combustible cigarette flavor. That was an exemption in 2009. So what we're waiting for is this public comment period, and I'll come back to that. And so that's regulatory policy. The FDA's regulatory policy process, first they propose a rule, then the next thing will be this public comment period, which will be really critical and essential for participation. And that will hopefully happen this year, will be 60 to 90 days where you can contribute. And I'll come back to that, how we can effectively craft a message from the Central Valley, from your communities to contribute to that process. And then the FDA will kind of take that into account and finalize the rule. And then at the state level, a lot of you are aware you were engaged in advocacy for SB 793, which is enacted, but it's pending implementation. So SB 793 this year is up for a vote. So there's a referendum vote that's industry sponsored. So it's on the election in November. There'll be opportunity to vote for that referendum, whether to uphold the law and allow its implementation, or to get rid of it. And so that really is an opportunity to, either continue ongoing activities and a vote. If you vote in general, right, some of your organizations have components of your work or civic engagement, just getting more people to get registered to vote. It's the end of January, so getting people to register to vote who are eligible, getting people to be aware that this will be on the ticket. That's really important, because sometimes what happens with these elections is people vote for politicians, but they don't vote for the referendums. They don't vote for these other pieces, which also impact health policy. So, getting the word out, becoming aware of the referendum vote, that this will be something that will be on the ballot, and kind of the differences. So if you vote yes, that means that you're upholding the implementation of this statewide flavor ban that was passed. And if you vote no, you're getting rid of it. And so that will be this year really important, just to be aware of it, to be knowledgeable, and to engage in that process. And then at the local level, hundreds of local jurisdictions have already banned characterizing flavors. Here in California, as of earlier this month, there's 118 cities and counties that have already banned flavors, have their own policies, some of which look differently, right, than SB 793, and some of which actually look pretty similar. So previous webinar really talked about the importance of local policy, and we're aware of some efforts here in the Central Valley to enact local policies as well, to really have an effect and impact in your local environment. And so these are all windows of opportunity. The next slide. And today I want to focus on advocacy strategies. So here is the full menu of advocacy strategies that you can engage in. And some prior webinars and workshops have focused on some of these and elevated and giving you kind of the how to do these things. And so I'll just start by reading through them. So you can collaborate in interest group or an advocacy coalition, as some of you are already doing, right? There's strength in numbers. You can contact policymakers directly via email, set up a meeting. A previous webinar or previous workshop did a really great job of like, what do you actually do if you have that meeting? So I'll encourage you to look back at some of those resources. You can contribute to public comment periods. So today I'll talk a little bit about that and what that means with the FDA process, for instance. In the media, with newspapers, you can write an opinion editorial, also known as an op-ed, a letter to the editor. You can engage in social media. You can submit a statement of support or opposition. And later today, you'll have an example of a letter of support for a policy. And you can engage in issue advertising. And what I want to draw your attention to is a lot of these strategies are written forms of communication. And so you can think about, the email, even an email, writing that email. How do you effectively communicate what you want to communicate? The public comment period is largely written. Same thing with the newspaper strategies, the statement of support. And so here, I'll just talk about a couple of these as examples in the next slide, but in the chat, I will put in this resource. So a prior workshop had a piece by Liz Ferris from AHA that covered media advocacy. So if you want to, go through that, or you didn't have the privilege of attending that, feel free to go back through to that resource. But today I'll talk about mostly, written forms of communication and just give a couple examples of the public comment period and the op-ed. And so here, how do you effectively craft that message, right? And I like to call it the documentary approach. So you can think back on documentaries that you've watched that have been really impactful. And the way I kind of break it down with the documentary, it's usually the really impactful documentaries have a mix of these personal stories, right? Narratives from individuals and the population level data. That can be statistics, the health impacts of a substance or of a behavior. And then that can also mean public opinion. And so this documentary approach would be kind of your formula that you can use. How do you blend these things together to effectively craft that message? It's often not only that personal story of how something has impacted you, how flavors have impacted you or your family, but also that information of how it's impacted your community or your institution, right? So it's this combination. And one of the goals at NCPC has been to create and really amass more evidence on the population level data side, so you can access that. Because I think a lot of you already have those personal stories and narratives from your communities and at the individual level. But today later on the breakout sessions, you'll actually get to practice and kind of do this, right? And keep writing up the stories and revising them. So next slide. So now I'll just give you a couple of examples. So this was a newspaper op-ed written by Bonnie Halpern-Felscher, who's an NCPC affiliate. She's a professor at Stanford. This came out in 2018, and she wrote this op-ed to really highlight the vaping epidemic among youth. And so I just pulled out a couple of quotes to highlight how she did this. And as a researcher, she includes a lot of research evidence, and she writes about it in an accessible way in the op-ed. But the first line, actually, it starts off with her experience. So almost daily, educators across the country tell me that at least half of their students use e-cigarettes, mainly the Juul brand. And so she's telling you that first part in her experience in her work, she has access to educators because of her toolkit and the work that she does, but she's telling you the stories that she's hearing from them, that, half of the students are using e-cigarettes. So it's kind of this real on the ground in her work, stories that at our previous policy workshops, some of you have shared, right? What's happening in your schools, what's happening in your communities. And that may not be scientific evidence, but it's really powerful and just as valuable in understanding the scope of a problem. And so that's how this op-ed actually starts off. And then later on, what you see, I'll just read this example. She really summarizes the state of the scientific literature. So, one of the, and I'll just read through it. Vaping proponents also argue that the flavors in e-cigarettes play a role in helping adults switch from traditional cigarettes to e-cigarettes. However, studies have repeatedly shown that young people use e-cigarettes because of the flavors. If flavors didn't exist, they say they wouldn't vape. So she's summarizing briefly the state of the literature. One of the common reasons why people support e-cigarettes, right, is that people are switching over. But here she's bringing up this issue, it's demonstrated that flavors are really bringing in youth, encouraging initiation. So, and she does it in a very accessible way. And in the op-ed now, that because they're online as opposed to, not only print, you can click and see more about that. So here you'll see the documentary approach in this op-ed. So next slide. I just want to spend some time on the public comment period. So public comment periods, what are they? It's an opportunity for transparency for regulatory agencies like the Food and Drug Administration. So it's when a government agency, so it's different, right, than a legislative process. It's a different process than SB 793 when you go to the Capitol. When an agency like the FDA proposes a new rule or a new regulation, The second step would be to allow the public to comment and to contribute. This wasn't always the case in the United States, but for about the last 60 years or so, it has been the case to promote public participation and to allow others to contribute to what might be otherwise like this black box for rules and regulations. It's usually 60 to 90 days. So once the rule has been proposed or the regulation, it's supposed to be public in the Federal Register. And then within a year, although that has been delayed now with the proposal to ban menthol, you're supposed to have a 60 to 90-day period. So it's expected that in 2022, the FDA will have this public comment period where it allows anybody, institutions and individuals, to contribute their written comments for the policy. And so we're expecting that, and I think NCPC will circulate once that opportunity is available. And so it's going to be really important to be prepared for that, right? To have your written a draft or a template of what you would like to contribute to the FDA's public comment period. And here are some strategies. So citing scientific evidence in support or opposition of a policy. One of the issues with public comment periods is that people submit written comments that are not, that are very brief or don't have specific scientific evidence. And so in this case, the personal stories, the narratives are important, but so is if you can bring in research evidence. That's actually really critical to, and something that the FDA really values. So citing scientific evidence in support or opposition of the policy is valuable. Briefly explaining who you are, why you're a credible source, maybe your relevant experience, for instance, if you work with youth who use flavors or you have that sense, explaining that is important. Including a clear argument and summarizing the data, the research, and or your narratives to support your argument. And then being specific. One of the issues is that people submit these very general comments and they don't make it specific to the policy that's being proposed or aspects of the policy. So saying whether you support or you don't is really important. So next slide. And I think I won't read this, but you'll have access to this later. Here's an example of a longer kind of how the Campaign for Tobacco Free Kids, how they summarize the state of the research. And I just wanted to give you that example. And so, this was in 2009. Next slide. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is just scientific evidence that's available. This is a paper that was just published a week ago that actually we've heard comments about whether people support or oppose flavor bans here in the Valley. And so this was a public opinion survey that we conducted in 2020. And we actually found that 58% of registered voters here support a comprehensive flavored tobacco ban that includes menthol, and 59% support a flavored e-cigarette product sales ban. So we'll be circulating this article. It just came out, but we wanted to provide you scientific evidence from this community in order to include in your public comment periods or in your messages to policymakers. So we're really excited about this. And with that, I will end and hand it back to Dr. Burke.
Thank you so much, Dr. Payan, for that really informative and exciting presentation. And I love that you ended with that incredible paper that you just led. Really important information. We don't often see this kind of analysis of what's happening in our region. So a very important contribution. I want to remind everyone, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We will try to answer them as we can, and we want to, have as much engagement as possible. So it's my honor right now to introduce Dr. Sabrina Smiley from San Diego State University. We're so honored to have her with us today. She's a professor in the Division of Health Promotion and Behavioral Science, and she's going to be talking about flavors through the lens of health equity. So welcome, Dr. Smiley.
Thank you, Nancy. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you all for inviting me to be a part of this panel, and also thank you for bringing attention to this topic. Next slide, please. I am speaking as an investigator with opinions and comments that are mine and not so much necessarily reflect those of the wonderful organization that funds my work. And I also want to note that the word tobacco in this presentation refers to tobacco products that are commercially manufactured, distributed, and marketed. So I'm not referring to tobacco used in sacred ways by some of the original indigenous peoples of North America. Next slide, please. So I want to start here. This is a paper, it's actually a framework, but it's part of a paper released by Stephen B. Thomas and colleagues. And they examined a conceptual framework of 3 generations of health disparities research. And in this paper, they propose a new generation, a 4th generation of research, really calling for action and community engagement to address structural inequalities, to eliminate disparities. And I really feel like this is a good framework, especially for this meeting, as you begin to prepare your comments, to really keep that in mind that yes, tobacco use is an individual level behavior, but structural determinants really are driving disparities in use, especially among communities of color. So the voice of community members is a must. These policies around flavors are really novel and they fit into 3rd generation. They provide solutions, but again, in order to take action and to really be intentional about getting to health equity, we have to involve community members and target our messagings and tailor our messages to these communities that have different material conditions, right? So just want us to keep that in mind in this framework. Next slide, please. So reasons for tobacco-related health disparities. Again, this will fall into the 2nd generation and 3rd generation of health disparities research, but I just want to quickly revisit it. Tobacco use and exposure, in particular, combustible tobacco product use. So my focus today is more so on menthol cigarettes and flavored cigar products. These products are more likely to occur in communities of color, Black, Brown, Indigenous. We also have evidence of this disproportionate use among our LGBTQ communities. So we're talking vulnerable and marginalized groups. And evidence suggests that structural forces really play an important role in tobacco product uptake, subsequent use, and also maintenance or perpetuation of use. So if we really view, again, I just want to drive this point home, if we view tobacco use, if we move from the individual level and personal choice and really begin to view tobacco use and nicotine dependence and disparities through a structural competency lens, then we can really get at the drivers, this deliberate racial targeting and targeted marketing of communities of color, the lack of enforcement of age of sale in the retail environment, unequal access to cessation resources, in addition to neighborhood stress and economic stress, all of this still happening in a pandemic that's further exploited existing disparities. Next slide, please. So the 3 key flavored tobacco products I want to focus on today, menthol cigarettes, flavored e-cigarettes, flavored cigars, but in particular menthol cigarettes and flavored cigars. So to just revisit, menthol improves the sensory experience of smoking. I believe it's Dr. Phil Gardner with the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Conference who said, menthol makes the poison go down easier. But overall, whether it's menthol cigarettes, if it's e-cigarettes or flavored cigars, flavors they mask the harshness and taste of tobacco or nicotine for e-cigarettes, which makes it more appealing to youth and new users. Next slide, please. So menthol cigarettes, the evidence is so clear. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. but we know that this flavor is used disproportionately in Black communities. So this data shows that among Black smokers, 12 years and older, 84.6% smoke menthol cigarettes compared to 28.9% of their white counterparts. And again, if we're thinking using that structural competency lens, a lot of this has been due to racial targeted marketing in Black communities. And this marketing has been taking place for at least 60 years at this point. Next slide, please. And I just want to show, yes, thank you. I just want to show the marketing. Again, dating back to at least the 50s, 1950s, but you see the industry has exploited African-American cultural values like community, and then also our contributions to the arts and entertainment fields. Next slide, please. Now, you know, I argue, a few other colleagues in the field argue that, you know, we've done a great job as far as, you know, younger users, specifically Black users, are not as likely to start using menthol cigarettes. They know the dangers of menthol cigarettes, but, you know, the landscape has changed drastically. And now you have more targeting of flavored cigars, you know, in particular, little cigars and cigarillos packed with flavors, super cheap, available in singles. So less regulation compared to menthol cigarettes, right? So now you have cigar companies like Swisher Sweets, Backwoods that are heavily targeting these products to a younger generation of Black consumers, and really Black and brown consumers. If you Google Swisher Sweets today and look at their websites, you're gonna see a lot of plays for urban youth and hip hop culture. Again, so whereas the older generation more likely to use menthol cigarettes, the marketing was, you know, geared towards entertainment, the arts, but now it's still entertainment, but it's a younger demographic related to hip hop, even reggae. So there's a clear appeal and targeting to a new generation of users with these flavored cigar products. Next slide, please. And then I also want to point out that among youth, we do have data at the national level showing that youth today are more likely, their first combustible product of choice is more likely to be a cigar product, little cigars, rather than cigarettes. So while that speaks to the advancement we've made in reducing cigarette use, but again, I just want to drive home the point that flavored cigars are really being targeted to a younger generation. Okay, so quickly, policy solutions. Novel tobacco flavor policies have the potential to mitigate the effect of tobacco product flavors on health disparities, but community engagement is a must. Next slide, please. So Truth Initiative, this slide has probably been updated, but in June of 2020, Truth Initiative tracked that there are currently 331 localities with a local flavor policy, so covering about 20% of the US population. And as you can see, most of these policies are in California. So we're leading the way. So all eyes on the state when it comes to the vote on the referendum 793. Next slide, please. So quickly, I do want to just talk about how, in addition to tobacco control policies, the industry is still opposing these policies. So there is clear effort to oppose these bills. And I want to highlight how Swisher Sweets in particular, this is a paper I published with colleagues that, you know, right after the murder of George Floyd, you had the president of Swisher Sweets doing this performative activism, fake solidarity, really to create brand loyalty. So solidarity around Black Lives Matter and how we're listening, but they're really just trying to create brand loyalty when we know that the tobacco industry is one of the first institutions to do direct harm to the Black community. But it's messaging like this on their Instagram page right after the killing of George Floyd that promotes more use and leads to brand loyalty. Next slide. At the same time, there's a long documented history of our own institutions, our cultural institutions that are partnering with the tobacco industry. This is a great example. So the murder of Eric Garner in Staten Island, years later, last year, his mother is featured in an ad opposing SB 793. Behind this commercial is the National Newspaper Publishers Association, which promotes Black-owned media. They're behind this ad. If you go to their website, one of their leading partners is Reynolds American. In this commercial, she's saying a new law would criminalize menthol cigarettes, which Black people smoke almost exclusively, giving police officers another excuse to harass and harm any Black man, woman, or child they choose. Our leaders should know better. A bad law has consequences for mothers like me. So this is, again, why we need messages that really counter what the industry is doing in our communities. Next slide. I want to quickly talk about a project that's near and dear to me. This project is funded by the Tobacco-Related Disease Research Program. It's a 2-year project. My team and I are working in unincorporated areas of Los Angeles County. These areas have a menthol cigarette and other flavor tobacco product ban in place in the retail environment. So our goal, we have 2 aims. The first aim is to interview retailers in predominantly Black neighborhoods, assessing their knowledge, their attitudes about the ban. And then we also we're interviewing menthol smokers in these communities as well. Again, assessing their knowledge and opinions about the ban. So one of our first, this partnership is with the, one of our first activities included a virtual community kickoff. The California Black Women's Health Project was a key partner in this kickoff. Ms. Kara Magruder, a leading advocate and scholar with the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, was our guest speaker. And so I want to show you the narratives that came out of this kickoff. So we had a Q&A at the end of the kickoff where stakeholders really talked about this ban. So next slide. I'll just highlight, since my time is running out, but I just want to highlight some of the narratives. Overall, community members, stakeholders are talking about structural issues. So, the institutionalization, the norms around smoking in the Black community. So we need messaging that really that talks about disrupting those norms and more so promoting cessation. You have a participant who said, "You weren't cool if you didn't have a pack of Newport cigarettes. I realized if I don't stop smoking cigarettes, I'm going to die." There's also talk about engaging retailers in their community in tobacco control policies. So one participant stated, in terms of the retailers, it's a question between their profits and saving Black lives. You also see some messaging that could be linked to the messaging that the industry is putting out there around criminalization and over-policing in Black neighborhoods as a result of these bans. One participant described that in the narrative. Next slide. So we have a paper that's coming out looking at a lot of these narratives, but I developed a table that concerns are going to be different for different communities. This is unique to what we're seeing in our data with Black menthol smokers. So potential, these are the concerns, and then we're proposing some responses. So the concerns quickly include over-policing, an illicit or Black market, this notion of paternalism. Why aren't non-menthol cigarettes or the white man's cigarette not banned? Why is it menthol cigarettes? And then the concerns around the impact on small independent retailers in Black communities, and just some highlighted responses that could be used in messaging or public comments related to each concern. So for example, concerns about discrimination could be met with messaging around the fact that marketing appeal, targeted marketing, is the original discriminatory action, and menthol cigarette and flavor cigar bans correct this action. Last slide. So I'll end with how I started, which is, this is a really great moment we're in. We have novel policies that are in play, but again, we need to craft messages and public comments that speak to the needs in each community. So all messages are not going to look the same because all communities don't look the same. When it comes to the Black community, structural racism impacts all of us despite our socioeconomic status. So the messaging has to reflect what's going on in the community. In addition to, we need to promote cessation, especially free cessation. So I'll stop there and address any comments. Thank you all so much again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Smiley. Really for that wonderful, wonderful presentation. I want to invite everyone to just kind of take a deep breath. We've thrown a lot of information at you kind of quickly, but really powerful. I really appreciate your attention to the 4th generation of engaged research that addresses structural disparities. And highlighting the nefarious fake activism and advocacy on behalf of tobacco industry in order to increase brand loyalty. I mean, exploiting tragedy in this way is just horrible. As someone Lauren noted in the chat, she can't believe that they exploited this mother's trauma in this way. So thank you for linking those to our research and policy agenda. That's such powerful messaging. So we're going to pivot for just a minute to talk about other resources that we have, that NCPC has to make available to you. So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about resources that you might find useful in developing your own response, your own public comment, and then we'll talk a little bit about how, framing, how to make these messages, these comments as impactful as possible. So I'd like to invite Dr. Song back to the floor to address some of the resources that we have available for your use.
Thank you, Nancy. And Dr. Smiley, Dr. Payán, thank you so much. I mean, you represent basically the foundations of tobacco control research. And so we so appreciate you motivating us and giving us some concrete examples. So what you've described are things that we hope to elevate and highlight and amplify so that policymakers can hear how this impacts us on a daily basis. And so part of the mission of NCPC is to, and I say this all the time, it's to arm you with science and arm you with resources. So what we've done is on our website, we've got a separate section called resources. And we've uploaded a few documents that we hope are helpful for you as you're thinking about how to articulate and amplify your experiences with flavored policies and flavored products. So here we have up as examples, there are a lot of messages we're hearing in the community. There are a lot of myths out there about what flavored policies might do to our communities. So we've uploaded several documents that specifically address and help frame the issue as we're hearing it in the community. So we have here Fast Facts published by the American Heart Association. We also have a point-by-point question and answer document on the menthol ban and how the industry is trying to frame the argument, right? How they're trying to frame the issue, and a point-by-point rebuttal to some of those issued by the Center for Black Health and Equity. Next slide. We also have a document that we've uploaded from the Public Health Law Center, again, looking at the issue of health equity and how flavor restrictions will, is an important step forward to health equity, as well as an NCPC sponsored policy paper authored by Dr. Smiley, Dr. Arturo Durazo, who's joined us at NCPC as well. We will send all of this out as a link to all of you. And if you go to ncpc.ucmerced.edu, all of those will also be available to you immediately. Next slide. In addition, we've got a document up there to help in terms of wording. What we're hoping is there's quite a bit of research about how to write persuasively with emotion, and yet to be able to think about and centering a lot of our arguments, not just in terms of our experiences, but also in research. And some of the words that we can use to help highlight metaphors to be able to make our arguments persuasively. So that document is there to help frame some of your stories and your messages. And so this document here that we have up here not only helps us frame some of those, those experiences, but also some of the words that we might be able to use. Next slide. And we've also included the paper that Dr. Payán had led that came from our community core at NCPC. But in addition, that was something that we thought would be really helpful for you, if you could advance forward, is that, oh, go back, is we've been able, many of you have told us we need local data, right? That's going to be an incredibly powerful tool for you to be able to say, in our county, this is what's going on. So we've also made available to you some of the breakdown of the statistics in our paper by county. So you can take a look at your county to see where you are in terms of those who agree, strongly agree, disagree, and strongly disagree with flavored tobacco restrictions. Next slide. We also have an example of impactful writing. What we're hoping with this exercise, and thank you American Heart Association for providing this template on the basics of how we might be able to construct a persuasive letter to legislators that you could easily turn to, turn it around for op-ed pieces or communications in other outlets. A big part of this is starting off a piece of writing with the significance, right? Like, what is going on? Why is this important? And then bringing in some of your local statistics, and then bringing in some of those powerful stories that we have heard about. So we're going to go into this in breakout sessions. And of course we are, oh, if you could go back, Nellie, we're going to talk about this. One thing that I did want to, we did want to go over with you are on elements of what really good, clear writing might include. And so I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Burke, who is a fantastic writer. She's an amazing writer. Every time I read something from her, it gives me goosebumps. So I'm going to give the floor over to Dr. Burke before we go into breakout sessions.
Thank you, Anna. I am humbled with your comments. We'll see. When I think about impactful writing, I often try to think about what kind of writing do I like to see? What engages me? What gets me excited and gets me to want to learn more? And what I'm often drawn to is writing that is story-based. Even whether if it's a historical text, as if it's told through someone's experience or story, I find it more powerful. And also if it's told in the writer's voice. You know, we're talking about writing, and writing can be very intimidating, but we all are effective speakers. And if we write the way we speak, we can get our message across very, very well. So as Dr. Song mentioned, and as this example shows, one of the most effective ways of writing a public comment is to have the most important information up front, like what is the problem? Why is this significant? Why should they care? And then think about your structure and making sure that it's easy for the reader to follow. Not too complicated, not super long sentences, punchy, to the point. And then using personal stories. Dr. Payán mentioned earlier in one of our prior workshops, we talked about how to engage with legislators, how to engage with policymakers when you meet with them in person. And in that workshop, we talked about engaging with your story, like how are these things affecting you? Well, we want to do that in writing as well. And so that's one of the things we're going to be talking about in the breakout sessions. The other piece is this tacking back and forth between the story, the effect, the experience, and the statistics. And that's, I think, super important for our region, especially because, as we mentioned, we have this new hot off the press data about attitudes in our region that we can actually utilize. So, so we're very excited about that. And then lastly, that you want to conclude your comments with a call to action. Like, what do you want to see done to really focus the reader? So with that, next slide, please. We're going to be moving into breakout sections, which will, enable us to work in smaller groups to actually start doing some of this writing together. And I just want to bring us back to our presentations and highlight the way that Dr. Smiley illustrated the ways that science gets manifest in daily life. And in our communities. And Dr. Payan described the different ways we can impact and engage with policy. And I think it was Dr. Payan pointed out that many of these ways are based in writing. So this is our opportunity to work together with support to generate some effective writing. And so the breakout rooms are designed to give you to give you the opportunity to pull together tangible and real world examples about the impact of flavors on your community that you can then utilize in public comment. So we have wonderful facilitators, as you can see on this slide, in each of the breakout rooms who will guide the discussion. They're going to provide you with resources and strategies for linking these personal and community experiences with relevant data. So with that, let's move into the breakout sessions.
Discussion, albeit short, but it was great to learn about, stories in the Valley, and quite disturbing like the others. And I don't want to miss anything, so I'm going to read some of the stories, and then we'll invite anyone that was in my room to raise their hand and share as well, in case I missed anything. So in Madera at the high school, they had to install smoke detector devices in the bathroom because many students vape there. And those that don't vape feel like they need to go off campus to go to the bathroom. So basically those who vape have taken control of the bathroom. In Fresno, an after school program coordinator for several middle schools and kids would go into the restroom, and they'd have a community vape pen, and they'd put tissue paper over it in the windowsill. And 2 to 3 kids would go in at a time to use, and found out it was, they found out it was marijuana later. And because school policy does not cover marijuana at this point, they only got a slap on the wrist. And then also, someone did a table at Fresno State, and some of the students there were upset because they felt manipulated and lied to, because they thought vaping was healthier and just water vapor, until they were in the ER from complications with asthma, or it triggered their mental health illnesses. In the tribal communities, they have different laws, tribal laws on the reservations. So need to do, some more education around secondhand smoke and thirdhand smoke. And then finally in Merced, we've seen just in the back of our office building, a group of teenagers who looked like high school students that group themselves after school to smoke and vape in an open, it's an open space like the parking lot there. We also discussed how, in some of the letters that you write, it really, just to underscore how important it is to share personal experiences. So even if it's an organization writing the letter, just to include these examples, but put a name to those if at all possible, and make sure those folks are at the committee hearing, if it's educational or political. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Did anyone else from Jamie's group have anything to add? Okay, I will move on to Layla.
Hi, so there's definitely some themes that I've noticed between what we discussed in our group and what some of the other groups have talked about as well. Is there was an issue here in Fresno County where they had to close the bathrooms at a local high school because of the vaping was so prevalent. Another one of our work group members from Orange County had an adult coalition member that shared that her daughter was so addicted to vaping flavored tobacco products that she would carry around her vape device in the band of her underwear at home so she could get her vaping in whenever she could. So those were some of the main points that we covered in our group.
Thank you, Layla, for sharing that. Were there any other groups that wanted to report back? Okay, if not, wow, what powerful stories. As Anna noted in the chat, she said these are such vivid examples of how flavors are manifesting in our communities in real life. And they are stories that policymakers need to hear. Sometimes we think policymakers already know all this. They really don't. They don't know how this epidemic is affecting parents, how it's affecting kids, how it's impacting their learning, having to go off campus to go to the restroom because your bathroom's been taken over or closed due to the vaping activity that's going on. The number of young people that are initiating use of tobacco-related products because they smell it, because it's a curious smell. It smells sweet, and it kind of makes them hungry, and then wow, this is really interesting. The disguising or kind of creation of these really attractive products, the hoodie string, a watch that's actually a vape pen, so it's easily concealable. The use of social media to recommend to each other how to keep these things concealed, where to buy products, how to access them at school and at the corner store, at high schools where kids are going off campus for lunch, a privilege, right? But where they're going to buy their lunch, they're also getting marketed, heavily marketed tobacco-related and vape products. This is not happening the same way everywhere, right? It's happening more in our communities. It's happening more in communities of color. And that's where equity comes in. We have to ensure that our policymakers see that this experience is not hitting all youth the same way, right? And we can use the stories that we collected today to get that message across. And hopefully you all will leave here with some really tangible examples that you can couple with some of the data that we presented and the resources that we have on our website to actually put into these letters and public comment and move forward. And the NCPC is here really to help you with that process. So it doesn't end with what we've done today, as powerful as what we've done today is. We are here to continue to work with you. We can work with you on drafts. We can help you access data that you might need. And we have the resources already together that Dr. Song presented. So I think with that, we are ready to close for today. And I just want to thank everyone for this really exciting and important discussion. And I hope it's the beginning of a collaboration to move forward on a regional comment, really, from all of the different perspectives that we brought together today. I think that we can really impact our representatives to ensure that, that we address this issue in our community. So thank you again. And we will be sending, as Alex mentioned in the chat, we will be sending a recording of this webinar as well as some of the resources that we shared with you in a follow-up email to all of you. And again, those of you who didn't receive a lunch voucher, you will, a gift card, you will be receiving one. So thank you again for attending.